The unexpected encounter. The vast expanse of space stretched out before Lieutenant Sarah Chen as she guided her X-Wing fighter through the debris field of a long-forgotten battle. The remnants of ancient warships drifted silently around her, a graveyard of metal and memories. Sarah had been on a routine patrol of the outer rim of human space, keeping an eye out for any signs of the aggressive Zarkesh Empire that had been encroaching on human territory. As she weaved through the field, her sensors pinged, alerting her to an anomaly. Sarah frowned, adjusting her scanners. "That can't be right," she muttered to herself. The readout showed an enormous energy signature, far larger than anything she'd encountered before. Curiosity piqued. She banked her X-Wing towards the source. As she cleared a particularly dense cluster of debris, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There, looming against the backdrop of stars, was a colossal warship. Its sleek, predatory design was unmistakably Zarkesh, but its sheer size dwarfed anything in the known Zarkesh fleet. This was a dreadnought, a ship of legend that Sarah had only heard whispered about in briefings. "Control, this is Phantom Lead," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "I've encountered a Zarkesh vessel. It's a dreadnought." Static crackled over her comms. She was too far out. The signal couldn't reach her handlers back at base. Sarah was on her own. The dreadnought's sensors must have detected her approach. A harsh, guttural voice boomed across all frequencies. "Insignificant human craft, you have entered restricted Zarkesh space. Power down your systems and prepare to be tractored aboard. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction." Sarah's mind raced. If she allowed herself to be captured, the Zarkesh would learn the location of human outposts in this sector. If she tried to run, the dreadnought's superior speed would likely overtake her before she could jump to hyperspace. Fighting seemed suicidal, but it might buy enough time for her to send a warning to the fleet. With a deep breath, Sarah made her decision. She diverted power to her shields and weapon systems. "Sorry, big guy," she said, a grim smile playing on her lips. "But I don't go down without a fight." The dreadnought's response was immediate. Scores of laser cannons along its hull lit up, filling space with a deadly lattice of energy. Sarah's hands flew over her controls, sending the X-Wing into a series of wild, evasive maneuvers. She barrel rolled and juked, the G-forces pressing her hard into her seat as blasts of searing light flashed past her cockpit. "Come on, girl," Sarah urged her fighter, patting the console affectionately. "Show 'em what you can do." She spotted a gap in the dreadnought's firing pattern and seized the opportunity. The X-Wing dove towards the massive ship, hugging its hull so closely that the point defense systems couldn't track her effectively. Sarah's targeting computer locked onto what looked like a shield generator. She squeezed the trigger, letting loose a volley of laser fire followed by a proton torpedo. The explosions blossomed against the dreadnought's shields, which flickered but held. A rumbling laugh came over the comms. "Is that the best you can muster, human? Your species' reputation for tenacity is clearly exaggerated." The voice belonged to Admiral Korzath, one of the most feared commanders in the Zarkesh fleet. His tactics had laid waste to dozens of worlds, and now Sarah found herself facing him alone in the depths of space. "Oh, I'm just getting warmed up," Sarah retorted, even as warning lights flashed across her console. Her shields were already down to 60%, and she barely scratched the dreadnought. Korzath's ship began to turn, bringing more weapons to bear on the nimble X-Wing. Sarah realized she needed to change tactics fast. She remembered an old maneuver from her training days, one that was considered too risky for practical use. But these weren't practical circumstances. Sarah cut her engines and fired her maneuvering thrusters in rapid succession, sending her X-Wing into a controlled tumble. To the dreadnought's targeting systems, she would appear to be spiraling out of control. As she tumbled, Sarah kept her eyes locked on a specific point on the dreadnought's hull, a vulnerable junction where the armor plates met. The moment her fighter completed its third rotation, Sarah fired everything she had. Laser blasts and proton torpedoes streaked towards the dreadnought. Most of them splashed harmlessly against its powerful shields, but one torpedo slipped through a momentary gap, detonating against the hull. A satisfying explosion rocked the massive ship. Alarms blared across all frequencies as the dreadnought's shields fluctuated. Sarah allowed herself a moment of triumph before the reality of her situation set in. She'd scored a hit, but she was still a lone X-Wing against a ship that could lay waste to entire fleets. As if to emphasize this point, a barrage of fire from the dreadnought caught Sarah's fighter. Her ship shuddered violently, alarms screaming as systems began to fail. "Not good, not good," Sarah muttered, fighting to keep control as her X-Wing spiraled away from the dreadnought. Through the spinning of her craft, Sarah caught glimpses of the massive warship. It was turning ponderously, bringing its main batteries to bear. She knew that if those weapons locked onto her, it would be over in an instant. With her engines sputtering and her shields almost depleted, Sarah faced a moment of truth. She could try to retreat, to run and warn the fleet about the dreadnought's presence. But deep in her gut, she knew that if she left now, this ship would go on to destroy countless lives. Humanity would be caught unprepared for the devastation it could unleash. Sarah's hand hovered over the hyperspace controls. It would be so easy to jump away, to live to fight another day. But as she looked at the looming form of the dreadnought, she made her choice. "All right, you oversized trash compactor," Sarah said, her voice steady as she gripped her flight stick. "Let's dance." With that, she gunned her failing engines, driving her X-Wing straight towards the heart of the Zarkash dreadnought. The space around her lit up with weapons fire as she began the most daring attack run of her life, knowing that the fate of humanity might well rest on her next moves. As Part 1 concludes, Sarah Chen finds herself in a desperate situation, facing overwhelming odds against the Zarkash dreadnought. Her bold decision to stay and fight sets the stage for an epic battle that will test the limits of human ingenuity and determination. David versus Goliath. The vastness of space became a chaotic maelstrom as Sarah's X-Wing hurtled towards the Zarkash dreadnought. Laser fire crisscrossed the void, creating a deadly web that Sarah navigated with a combination of skill and desperate luck. Her ship's systems blared warnings, but she pushed them to their limits, her mind racing to formulate a plan. "Come on, think," Sarah muttered to herself, eyes darting between her failing shields and the looming bulk of the enemy vessel. She needed to find a weakness, something that could turn this suicide run into a fighting chance. Admiral Korzath's voice crackled over the comms once more, a mix of amusement and grudging respect in his tone. "Your bravery is admirable, human, if misguided. Why throw your life away? Surrender now, and I may yet spare you." Sarah's response was to roll her X-Wing, avoiding another barrage of fire. As she did, something caught her eye. A slight fluctuation in the dreadnought's shield pattern near what appeared to be a primary power conduit. "Not today, Scaleface," Sarah retorted, a plan forming in her mind. It was risky, borderline insane, but it was all she had. She opened a broad frequency channel, hoping her words would reach not just Korzath, but any human ships that might be in range. "This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Earth Defense Force. I've engaged a Zarkash dreadnought in Sector 7. They're planning an invasion. I'm going to stop them or die trying." With that declaration, Sarah cut the comms and poured all available power into her engines. Her X-Wing shot forward, streaking towards the dreadnought's underbelly. The massive ship's point defense systems tracked her, filling space with a storm of laser fire. Sarah's world narrowed to the space between heartbeats. She juked and weaved, each movement a defiance of death. Blasts scorched her hull, alarms screamed, but she pressed on. The fluctuating shield section grew larger in her viewport. "Divert all power to forward shields," Sarah commanded her ship's computer. It was a desperate gambit. It would leave her rear defenses completely exposed. But if this worked... The X-Wing slammed into the dreadnought's shields at full speed. For a moment, it seemed as if Sarah had miscalculated, that she would be vaporized against the energy barrier. But then, With a flash of sparks and a screech of protesting metal, she broke through. Sarah found herself skimming the surface of the dreadnought, so close she could see individual armor plates streaking by. Proximity alarms wailed, but she ignored them, searching for her target. There, a massive power conduit, pulsing with energy. "Eat this," Sarah growled, unleashing every weapon her X-Wing had left. Laser fire and proton torpedoes slammed into the conduit. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with a silent flash that lit up space, the conduit exploded. The dreadnought shuddered, lights flickering across its hull. Sarah allowed herself a moment of triumph before reality reasserted itself. She was now trapped against the hull of an enemy ship that was very much still operational, with no shields and critically damaged engines. Inside the dreadnought, Admiral Korzath raged at his crew. "How did one insignificant fighter penetrate our defenses? Find that human and obliterate her." But Sarah wasn't done yet. With her ship's sensors in direct contact with the dreadnought's hull, she was picking up readings she couldn't before. There, just ahead, a docking bay. With a silent prayer to whatever might be listening, Sarah fired her maneuvering thrusters, guiding her crippled X-Wing towards the opening. It was an insane move, flying directly into the heart of the enemy ship, but it was her only chance for survival. As she approached the bay, massive doors began to close. Sarah grit her teeth, pushing her failing engines to their limit. At the last possible second, she cut power and went into a controlled tumble. Her X-Wing scraped through the narrowing gap, showering sparks in its wake, before skidding to a halt on the docking bay floor. For a moment, all was silent. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, Sarah's cockpit opened. She emerged, blaster in hand, into the cavernous bay of the Zarkesh dreadnought. Alarms blared, and she could hear the pounding of feet as enemy troops rushed to confront the intruder. Sarah took cover behind her battered X-Wing, checking her limited weapons and gear. She was trapped aboard an enemy vessel thousands of times her size, outnumbered and outgunned. The same thing would be to surrender, to hope for mercy or rescue. But Sarah Chen hadn't come this far to give up now. "All right," she said to herself, a grim smile playing on her lips as she checked the charge on her blaster. "Let's see what this oversized tin can is hiding." With that, Sarah set off into the depths of the dreadnought. She moved swiftly but cautiously, using the ship's own systems against it. Her fighter pilot's reflexes served her well as she ducked into maintenance shafts and slipped past patrols. As she made her way deeper into the ship, Sarah's mind raced. She needed to find a way to cripple this behemoth from the inside, to buy time for the human fleet to respond. But more than that, she needed information. Why was this dreadnought here, so far from the usual Zarkesh territory? What were they planning? Sarah's musings were interrupted by a squad of Zarkesh troops rounding a corner. Time seemed to slow as both parties registered each other's presence. Then, in a flash, the corridor erupted into chaos. Sarah dove for cover as energy bolts sizzled past her. She returned fire, her blaster finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. 2 Zarkesh went down, but more were coming. She could hear the heavy tread of reinforcements approaching. Backed into a corner, outgunned and running out of options, Sarah's eyes fell on a nearby control panel. Without hesitation, she fired, not at the troops, but at the panel itself. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, cutting off the Zarkesh reinforcements. At the same time, warning klaxons blared as the ship's gravity went haywire. Sarah found herself suddenly weightless, along with the remaining Zarkesh troops. Years of zero-G training kicked in. While the Zarkesh floundered, Sarah used the walls to propel herself, a deadly dance through the floating debris. In moments, it was over. Sarah stood, or rather, floated, victorious, surrounded by unconscious Zarkesh soldiers. As the gravity slowly reasserted itself, Sarah allowed herself a moment to catch her breath. She'd survived the immediate threat, but she was still deep in enemy territory with no clear way out. Then her eyes fell on one of the fallen Zarkesh. More specifically, on the security badge clipped to its uniform. A plan began to form in Sarah's mind. It was risky, borderline insane. But then again, that seemed to be the theme of the day. With a grim chuckle, Sarah began to strip the uniform from the unconscious alien. "Sorry about this, buddy," she muttered as she worked. "But I've got a dreadnought to sabotage." Minutes later, a figure in ill-fitting Zarkesh armor strode purposefully down the corridors of the dreadnought. Sarah's heart pounded beneath the alien breastplate, but she kept her movements confident and deliberate. She had no idea how long this disguise would hold up, but she intended to make every second count. As she navigated the labyrinthine interior of the massive ship, Sarah's mind whirled with possibilities. She needed to find a way to cripple this vessel, to ensure it never reached human space. But more than that, she needed answers. Why was this dreadnought here? What were the Zarkesh planning? Little did Sarah know, her actions had already set in motion events that would change the course of the war, and perhaps the fate of humanity itself. As she delved deeper into the heart of the enemy stronghold, the true scale of the conflict was about to reveal itself. Turning the tables. Sarah's borrowed Zarkesh armor chafed as she strode through the dreadnought's corridors, her every step a careful balance between confidence and caution. The ship's layout was a maze of twisting passages and vast chambers, each turn bringing new dangers and potential discoveries. As she rounded a corner, Sarah nearly collided with a group of Zarkesh officers deep in conversation. She snapped to attention, her heart pounding beneath the alien breastplate. The officers barely spared her a glance, continuing their heated discussion in their guttural language. Sarah held her breath, straining to catch any words she recognized from her limited knowledge of Zarkesh. A few phrases stood out: human expansion, preemptive strike, and most alarmingly, planet killer. As the officers moved on, Sarah's mind raced. The presence of this dreadnought suddenly made terrifying sense. This wasn't just an invasion force. It was the vanguard of an extinction-level attack on humanity. With renewed urgency, Sarah consulted the ship's layout on a nearby terminal. If the Zarkesh were planning something on the scale of a planet killer, the weapon systems would be immense. She scanned the schematics, looking for anything out of the ordinary. There, a massive chamber near the ship's core, heavily shielded and restricted. It had to be the control center for whatever superweapon the dreadnought carried. Sarah set off towards her target, her borrowed security clearances allowing her to bypass most checkpoints. But as she approached the restricted area, she encountered heavier security. Guards stood at attention before massive blast doors, their weapons at the ready. She needed a distraction, something to draw them away from their posts. Sarah's eyes fell on a nearby maintenance panel. A plan formed in her mind. Risky, but with potential for chaos. With a few quick keystrokes, Sarah overrode the safety protocols on several decks. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. Emergency bulkheads slammed down, compartments depressurized, and the ship's gravity fluctuated wildly. In the ensuing chaos, Sarah slipped past the distracted guards and into the restricted area. The chamber beyond was a marvel of alien engineering. At its center stood a massive device, pulsing with barely contained energy. Holographic displays showed star systems and planetary bodies, with one particular planet highlighted: Earth. "Oh no, you don't," Sarah muttered, approaching the main control console. Her fingers flew over the alien interface, trying to make sense of the weapons systems. She needed to disable it, but without triggering a catastrophic overload that could destroy the ship, and her along with it. As Sarah worked, a slow clap echoed through the chamber. She spun around to find Admiral Korzeth himself standing in the doorway, flanked by elite guards. "Impressive, Lieutenant Chin," the Admiral said, his reptilian features twisting into a sneer. "I wouldn't have thought a mere human capable of penetrating this far into my ship. But your luck ends here." Sarah raised her stolen weapon, but Korzeth's guards were faster. A stun blast caught her squarely in the chest, sending her crumpling to the floor. As darkness closed in, Sarah's last conscious thought was of failure. She had come so close, only to fall at the final hurdle. When Sarah awoke, she found herself restrained in what appeared to be the Dreadnought's bridge. Through the massive viewports, she could see the stars streaking by. They were in hyperspace, hurtling towards Earth. Admiral Korazath stood before her, his massive form silhouetted against the cosmic backdrop. "Ah, good. You're awake. I wanted you to witness this, Lieutenant Chen. The moment when your pitiful species finally understands its place in the galaxy." Sarah struggled against her bonds, her mind racing. Why? She managed to croak. Why this? Why now? Korzaf turned to her, his eyes glinting with a mix of contempt. And was that fear? Because you leave us no choice. Your kind, you humans, you're spreading through the stars like a plague. Adaptable, unpredictable, dangerous. The Zarkesh have ruled this sector for millennia. And we will not be supplanted by upstart apes who barely understand the power they wield. As the Admiral spoke, Sarah's eyes darted around the bridge, taking in every detail. There, a familiar panel, similar to the one she had used to cause chaos earlier. If she could just reach it. "You're making a mistake," Sarah said, trying to keep Korzaf talking. "Humanity isn't a threat to you. We could be allies, partners in exploring the galaxy." Korzaf laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Partners? Your history is nothing but conflict and destruction. No, the only safe human is a dead human. And soon, that will be all of you." The Dreadnought shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Earth loomed large in the view screen, a blue jewel hanging in the void. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of her homeworld, so beautiful and so vulnerable. "Prepare the planet killer," Korzaf commanded. "Let's show these humans the price of defiance." As the bridge crew rushed to obey, Sarah made her move. With a surge of desperate strength, she broke free from one of her restraints. Before the guards could react, she lunged for the control panel. Chaos erupted on the bridge. Alarms blared as Sarah's fingers danced over the controls, replicating the havoc she had caused earlier, but on a much larger scale. Gravity failed, lights flickered, and automated systems went haywire. In the confusion, Sarah managed to free herself completely. She dove for cover as Zarkesh guards opened fire, their shots going wild in the zero-gravity environment. "Stop her," Korzaf roared, his composure finally breaking. Stop her at all costs. But Sarah was in her element now. Zero-G combat had been a key part of her training, and she used every trick she knew. She bounced off walls, used floating debris as shields, and managed to arm herself with a fallen guard's weapon. As she fought, Sarah's mind raced. She had bought some time, but the Dreadnought was still a threat. She needed to find a way to neutralize it permanently, to save Earth and strike a blow against the Zarkesh Empire. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it, the Dreadnought's main reactor controls. If she could overload it, the ship would be crippled. It was a desperate move, one that might very well cost her her life, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She made a break for the controls, dodging energy blasts and grappling Zarkesh soldiers. With a final, desperate lunge, Sarah reached the panel. Her fingers flew over the controls, initiating a cascade overload in the main reactor. Warnings blared throughout the ship as systems began to fail. Korzaf, realizing what was happening, bellowed orders for an evacuation. But it was too late. The Dreadnought was tearing itself apart from the inside. As explosions rocked the massive ship, Sarah found herself face to face with Admiral Korzaf. The Zarkesh leader's eyes burned with hatred as he raised his weapon. "If I die here," he snarled, "I'm taking you with me, human." Sarah tensed, ready for one final confrontation. But before either of them could act, a massive explosion tore through the bridge. Sarah was thrown backwards, her world dissolving into chaos and darkness. As consciousness faded, Sarah's last thought was of Earth, still visible through the shattered view screen. She had done it. The Dreadnought was finished. Her home was safe. With that comforting thought, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the unlikely hero who had saved humanity, closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. The final gambit. Consciousness returned to Sarah in fits and starts. The acrid smell of burning electronics filled her nostrils, and the taste of copper lingered on her tongue. She blinked, her vision slowly focusing on the devastation around her. The bridge of the once mighty Galactic Dreadnought was in ruins. Sparks showered from shattered consoles, and the artificial gravity flickered erratically, causing debris to float lazily through the air before crashing back to the deck. Sarah groaned, pushing herself up on shaky arms. Every inch of her body screamed in protest, but she forced herself to move. She had to assess the situation, to make sure the threat to Earth was truly neutralized. As she stumbled to her feet, a harsh laugh cut through the chaos. Admiral Korzath emerged from behind a twisted bulkhead, his once pristine uniform now tattered and stained with his own dark blood. "You've lost, human," he snarled, limping towards her. "You may have crippled my ship, but the planet killer is self-contained. It will still fire, and your world will burn." Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped that destabilizing the reactor would have knocked out all the Dreadnought systems. But of course, a weapon of that magnitude would have failsafes. "You're bluffing," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady as she looked for a way out. A weapon, anything she could use. Korzath's lipless mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. "Am I? Why don't we find out together?" He raised a device in his clawed hand, a remote trigger. Time seemed to slow. Sarah saw Korzath's finger move towards the trigger. In that instant, she made her decision. With a yell of defiance, she launched herself at the Zarkesh admiral. They collided in a tangle of limbs, human and alien locked in a desperate struggle. Sarah fought with everything she had, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Her fingers clawed at Korzath's hand, trying to pry the trigger away from him. "You can't win," Korzath growled, his superior strength slowly overwhelming Sarah. "Your species is doomed." But Sarah wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. She was fighting for Earth, for humanity, for every living being that called her home planet their own. With a final, desperate surge of strength, she wrenched the trigger from Korzath's grasp. The device skittered across the floor, coming to rest near the shattered view screen. Both Sarah and Korzath lunged for it, but a sudden shift in the failing gravity sent them tumbling in opposite directions. Sarah found herself pinned against a console, watching helplessly as Korzath dragged himself towards the trigger. Time was running out. She needed to do something, anything, to stop him. Her eyes fell on the console she was pressed against. It was damaged, but still partially functional. An idea formed in Sarah's mind. Crazy, desperate, but possibly their only hope. With trembling fingers, she began to input commands. If she could reroute power from the failing reactor, create a feedback loop in the planet killer systems. Korzath's claws closed around the trigger. He turned to Sarah, triumph gleaming in his reptilian eyes. "Goodbye, human," he sneered, and pressed the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a low rumble began to build throughout the ship. But instead of firing towards Earth, the energy began to arc back through the Dreadnought systems. Korzath's look of triumph turned to one of confusion, then dawning horror. "What have you done?" he roared. Sarah allowed herself a grim smile. "I've turned your weapon against you, Admiral. The planet killer is overloading. This ship is about to become a very large firecracker." As if to punctuate her words, explosions began to rock the Dreadnought. Korzath scrambled to his feet, all thoughts of victory forgotten in the face of imminent destruction. "You're insane," he sputtered. "You'll die too." Sarah shrugged, wincing at the pain that shot through her battered body. "Maybe, but Earth will be safe. That's all that matters." Korzath stared at her for a long moment, a mixture of hatred and grudging respect in his eyes. Then, without another word, he turned and fled, presumably towards the escape pods. Left alone on the disintegrating bridge, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had done it. The dreadnought was finished, its planet-killing weapon turned into the instrument of its own destruction. Earth was safe. But as the ship shuddered and groaned around her, Sarah realized her victory might come at the cost of her own life. She was too injured, too exhausted to make it to an escape pod. This broken bridge would likely be her tomb. As if in response to her thoughts, a flicker of movement caught Sarah's eye. There, half hidden behind a fallen beam, was her salvation. An emergency teleportation device, standard issue on Zarkesh capital ships. With the last of her strength, Sarah dragged herself towards the device. Her vision swam, darkness creeping in at the edges as her battered body threatened to give out. But she pressed on, driven by the sheer will to live. Just as her fingers closed around the teleporter, a massive explosion rocked the ship. Sarah felt herself falling, tumbling through space as the dreadnought finally tore itself apart. In that last, desperate moment, Sarah activated the teleporter. There was a flash of blinding light, a sensation of being unmade and remade in an instant. And then, silence. Sarah opened her eyes to find herself floating in space, Earth a beautiful blue orb below her. The remains of the Zarkesh dreadnought sparkled in the distance, a new, short-lived constellation marking its demise. As the adrenaline faded and the full weight of her injuries made itself known, Sarah felt consciousness slipping away once more, but this time, she didn't fight it. She had won. Earth was safe. Whatever came next, she could face it knowing she had done her duty. As Sarah drifted in the void, her eyes locked on her home planet. A small smile played on her lips. In the distance, she thought she could see pinpricks of light moving towards her, rescue ships, perhaps. With that comforting thought, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, hero of Earth, defender of humanity, closed her eyes and let the stars carry her home. Aftermath and revelations. The steady beep of medical equipment was the first sound that filtered through Sarah's consciousness. She opened her eyes slowly, wincing at the bright lights of what she realized was a hospital room. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been a dream. The dreadnought, the battle, the narrow escape. But as she tried to sit up, the pain that lanced through her body confirmed the reality of her ordeal. A gentle hand pressed her back onto the bed. "Easy there, Lieutenant. You've been through quite an ordeal." Sarah turned her head to see Admiral Jenna Harper, the commander of Earth's defense fleet, sitting by her bedside. The older woman's face was a mixture of concern and barely concealed awe. "Admiral," Sarah croaked, her throat dry. "The dreadnought, Earth, is everyone safe?" Admiral Harper nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "Thanks to you, Lieutenant. You didn't just save Earth. You may have saved the entire human race." Over the next hour, as Sarah sipped water and gradually regained her strength, Admiral Harper filled her in on what had happened after her desperate gambit aboard the Zarkesh ship. The destruction of the dreadnought had been visible from Earth, a new, brief star flaring in the sky before winking out. Search and rescue ships had been dispatched immediately, finding Sarah unconscious but alive, drifting in space. But the real revelations came in the aftermath. The debris from the dreadnought had yielded a treasure trove of Zarkesh technology and intelligence. Earth scientists were already reverse engineering some of the alien tech, making leaps in propulsion and weapons systems that would have taken decades otherwise. More importantly, they had discovered the true extent of the Zarkesh's plans. The dreadnought had been just the first wave of a full-scale invasion fleet. Sarah's actions had not only destroyed their superweapon, but had thrown their entire battle plan into disarray. "The Zarkesh underestimated us," Admiral Harper said, her eyes gleaming. "They thought one ship could cow humanity into submission. Instead, you showed them what one human is capable of. The message has been received loud and clear. Earth is not to be trifled with." Sarah absorbed this information, a mix of pride and humility washing over her. "What happens now?" she asked. Admiral Harper's expression turned serious. "Now we prepare. The Zarkesh will be back. Make no mistake. But thanks to you, We'll be ready for them. Your actions have united Earth like never before. Every nation, every government is pooling resources to bolster our defenses." She paused, fixing Sarah with a penetrating look. "And that's where you come in, Lieutenant. Or should I say, Commander Chen." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Commander?" Harper nodded. "You're being promoted, effective immediately. And once you're back on your feet, I want you to lead our new rapid response force. You've proven you can think on your feet and beat impossible odds. We're going to need those skills in the coming conflict." The weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders, but instead of feeling burdened, she felt energized. She had stared into the face of humanity's destruction and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them head-on. "I'm honored, Admiral," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "When do we start?" Admiral Harper smiled, standing up. "Rest for now, Commander. You've earned it. But soon, we take the fight to them." As the Admiral left, Sarah leaned back in her bed, her mind racing with possibilities. The stars outside her window seemed to shine brighter now, full of promise and challenge in equal measure. The battle against the Dreadnought had been just the beginning. Humanity had been thrust onto a galactic stage, ready or not, but Sarah knew, with a certainty that ran bone deep, that they were ready. They would face whatever the universe threw at them, and they would prevail. Because that's what humans did. They adapted. They survived. They thrived. Sarah Chen closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. The Zarkesh thought they had seen the best humanity had to offer. They were wrong. The real show was just beginning. End of story. This concludes our 5-part HFY story. Lone Human X-Wing Engages Galactic Dreadnought. The narrative arc follows Sarah Chen's incredible journey from a routine patrol to becoming the pivotal figure in humanity's first major galactic conflict. It embodies the spirit of HFY storytelling, showcasing human ingenuity, determination, and the ability to overcome overwhelming odds. The story leaves open the possibility for future adventures as humanity prepares to assert itself on the galactic stage.